Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Russia sends drones into Polish airspace as NATO and the West respond. Trump reacts to Israel's targeted strike in Doha after several Hamas members and a Qatari security officer were killed. And the US president encourages the EU to place 100% tariffs on China and India, forcing economic pressure on Russia. Now, Poland says that it shot down 4 Russian drones, marking the first time strikes have entered NATO territory during the war with Ukraine. Ukraine's foreign minister claims Putin is attempting to test the West, whilst Poland's prime minister admits his country is at its closest open conflict since World War II. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte condemned Moscow's actions and sent a warning to Vladimir Putin. Take a listen.
The full assessment is ongoing. And to Putin, I mean, my message is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine. Stop the escalating war, which he is now basically mounting on innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure. Stop violating Allied airspace and know that we stand ready, that we are vigilant and that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
We can now go live to Warsaw to speak to Mateusz Mazzini, who is a foreign affairs commentator for the Gazeta Wyborcza. Thank you so much for joining us, Mateusz. It's great to have you on the show. So in the last hour or so, we've actually had a post on Truth Social from President Donald Trump, and it said, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go." So that's what Donald Trump said. What can we expect to see from the US in the next hours or the next days?
Well, I think that since January the 20th, we have all grown accustomed to the fact that if anything could be expected from President Trump is that he is very much an unpredictable leader. He is scheduled to talk in the coming hours on the phone with the newly sworn in Polish President Karol Nawrocki. But what the contents of that conversation will be, that still remains to be seen. We can already see that Donald Trump was quite hesitant to issue any statements with regard to the violation of Polish airspace by the Russian drones. We have had to wait several hours for him to actually say anything, even via the Truth Social platform. Other American officials, including State Secretary Marco Rubio, were more outspoken. We've heard more vigorous declarations on behalf of congressmen and senators and officials, both from the Democratic and Republican Party. But if Donald Trump will be decisive enough to perhaps threaten Russia with secondary sanctions or impose any other instrument of pressure to prevent further escalation, well, that remains to be seen. But judging by his track record of the last weeks and months, that is very unlikely at this point.
And you live about 160 kilometers from where one of the drones was actually shot down in Poland. Russia says they didn't plan to strike Poland. But what's your take on this? Was this a deliberate attack?
Well, if the Russian officials are actually admitting that these are Russian drones, quoting the Polish Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski, that's already an improvement because Russia finally admits that it is waging war against democratic European countries. And when we're talking about 19 different drones, which is the case right now, I don't think it is even remotely possible for this to be a mistake or an accident. 1, 2, 3, perhaps even 7 drones. Maybe that would be a sign of Russian incompetence, but 19 is more than obviously a deliberate attack. And I think we need to remember that this will be very closely monitored over the next few days, because on September 12th, the Zapad military exercises are set to begin in Belarus, which is another country neighboring Poland, a client state, a satellite state of Russia, and the military exercises will involve 35,000 Russian and Belarusian troops. On Tuesday, as a precaution, the Polish government decided to shut down entirely its border with Belarus, fearing escalation and potential escalation through hybrid measures, especially refugee crisis and increased migration pressure. So this is definitely Russia trying to find out what the levels of preparedness are in Poland and other NATO member states, because we need to remember that this was a coordinated action on behalf of NATO with the participation of Dutch, Italian, and German forces as well. And Vladimir Putin is very well aware of what he's doing, because taking into consideration that he's waging a war in Ukraine, a war that's very costly, that he has so far failed to win for over 3.5 years, he still needs to show off and prove to the world, namely to Europe, that he commands a very mighty military power.
And let's just talk about that a little bit more, because what you just basically said to me is Putin is testing NATO, and this is something that a lot of analysts are also saying. But Ukraine is Poland's next door neighbor. How right now is Poland preparing when it comes to dealing with a possible attack, or like today, being caught up in this crossfire between Russia and Ukraine? We do know that Poland's economy has been on a war footing, but is the country prepared for anything that could happen when it comes to Russia?
I actually think, all due respect, that this is ill-suited to say that this was an incident of crossfire. This was a deliberate action on behalf of the Russian Federation to invade the Polish airspace and send drones on the Polish territory, 4 of which were shot down. So I'm more than certain that the officials in the Kremlin are perfectly aware of what they're doing. And coming back to your initial question, to what extent Poland or any other NATO member state, for that matter, is prepared for this kind of conflict, I think we need to remember that Russia has been waging hybrid war or using hybrid measures against Eastern NATO member states for over a decade, if not longer. And we might not be very well prepared to counter drone attacks. And in fact, this proves my point that if a NATO member state is restored to using very costly F-35 jets that are scrambled to shut down cheap, sort of tinpot quality Russian drones, that means that we haven't learned our lesson from Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have F-35s, doesn't have air defense systems as sophisticated as Poland or Estonia or Lithuania or NATO, for that matter, yet they're shooting hundreds, if not thousands of those every day and every week. So there's a lesson, very important, very vital to be learned from how Ukrainians have been dealing with that kind of threat. But we also need to remember that Russia has been trying all sorts of different instruments coming out from, of their authoritarian playbook: cyber attacks, setting shopping malls on fire, recruiting civilians to carry on sabotage attacks. And this has been going on for a decade, if not more. So a certain level of resilience, or at least awareness, is deeply embedded in the Polish nation right now.
Mateusz, and just before I let you go, because we are slightly short on time, but Poland's Prime Minister has said this is the closest the country has been to open conflict since World War II. Do you think right now that this is where this is heading, to full escalation?
I'm not entirely convinced we're going to see a full escalation in the traditional meaning of that term. There will be no invasion or land invasion, incursion into Polish territory in the coming weeks or months, but we're going to certainly see more attacks of this sort on behalf of Russia or Belarus, or both, because Russians and Belarusians need to find out whether we're learning on the go, whether we're prepared, and how far can they go. And most importantly, and I think this is a very important message, whether we will be foolish enough to normalize this kind of behavior on behalf of Russia and say, well, yet another incursion into Polish airspace, a few drones here and there, is just a new normal. It isn't, and it should never become one.
Mateusz Mazzini, Foreign Affairs Commentator for Gazeta Viačorka. Thank you so much for joining us. I do appreciate your time and your analysis. Let's continue this conversation now with Franak Viačorka, Chief of Staff of the Belarus Opposition Leader. Franak, thank you so much for joining us. So you just heard the conversation I was having before, and I was just wondering if you feel the same way. It's important not to normalize this situation of Russian drones being shot down in Poland.
It's not good to normalize the war, because right now what Russia and Lukashenko are doing, they're trying to test the ability of the West to react, the unity of the NATO countries. They are trying to blackmail and put pressure on the societies in the European countries. And to distract attention from Ukraine. Basically, they are raising stakes, they are escalating the situation, and they are trying to show that the West is not able to defend itself. Many of these drones, which were flying to Poland this night, they were flying through Belarus territory. And it seems it was done deliberately, it's not done by accident, and it's done just on the eve of major military exercise, Zapad 2025, which are about to start on Friday. This Friday already. So we have to be very attentive, very cautious. And I think this is also the response of Putin to President Trump's efforts to bring peace. Basically, it shows that Putin doesn't want peace. He doesn't want any sit-down meeting with Zelensky. He just wants to escalate so much as possible and to get so much territory as he can.
And let's just talk a little bit about the US, Franak, because in a post on Truth Social, President Donald Trump has actually said, what's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go. Will this concern President Putin and Alexander Lukashenko?
Yes, it must concern, because it seems that in the White House, in Washington, there is a temptation and the appetite to impose bigger and stronger sanctions on Russia, on oil, on hydrocarbons, on other goods. Trump also pushes Europe to impose secondary sanctions on Russia and all the Russian partners for buying Russian oil, for example. Trump asks Europe not to buy Russian energy at all. And of course, if Putin continues this way, will continue such attacks on Poland and other member states, Trump will get much firmer position, because last half a year, Trump was playing diplomat, but we realized that Trump can play hardball.
Belarus claims the Russian drones that entered Poland had lost their track after the impact of electronic warfare. Was this an honest mistake by Russia, or is Belarus attempting to calm tensions in the region?
The second one. They are trying to justify themselves. Russians, they are not asking Lukashenko, the dictator in Belarus, if they are launching drones. And of course, the Lukashenko's regime, they do not want to bear responsibility for these attacks, and they don't want to have border with Poland completely closed. And they are trying to justify themselves. Oh, look, it's not us, it's Russians, it's electronic warfare, so we are not guilty here. Because just don't forget that yesterday, Polish Prime Minister stated that Poland is going to close completely the border with Belarus for days of military drills. If it happens, it will harm significantly Belarus economy, it will harm Russia, but it will also harm China, because up to 70% of Chinese-European land trade goes through Belarus-Polish border. And I think, all the situation, it forces the regime in Minsk to justify itself.
So, Franak, do you think that Russia might have actually sent those drones into Poland because of this closing of the border with Belarus that Poland is doing? Do you think that that was something that provoked this reaction?
I assume it might be the reason why we saw these drones. It was like a response to Prime Minister Tusk's statement about closing the border. But here we can just speculate. It's very difficult to find the reasoning for Russian actions. It's very difficult to explain Putin's activities and Putin's acts, what he does in Ukraine. So speculating, yes, it's possible.
And Lithuanian military intelligence is reporting that over 30,000 troops from Belarus and Russia will be involved in these exercises that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and you mentioned to me. How concerned should neighbouring countries be about these exercises? Is it a big concern for Lithuania and the countries that do border Russia and Belarus?
It's the biggest concentration of troops since 2022 when full-scale invasion has started. And don't forget, the invasion started with such exercises, which took place on Belarus territory, and then Russian troops finished exercise and they moved out, not directly to Russia, but through Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And Ukrainians, they started to defend themselves and they stopped this attack. And 30,000, it's not enough for opening new front. It's not enough for starting the war against Baltic states or Poland, but it's enough to create pressure. It's enough for provocations. We expect more drones flying over European and NATO countries next days. We expect more migrant attacks on the border with Poland, Lithuania, Latvia. So everything's possible. And also it's important to see not only what's happening during the exercise, but what's happening after exercise. How many of these troops, they will stay in Belarus on the border with Poland, Ukraine, and Lithuania. This is what matters the most. How many missiles will remain in Belarus? This is important. And also they promise the nuclear drills, the testing of the nuclear facilities. This is very dangerous for entire Europe.
And just before I let you go, Franak, just do you think Europe has done enough to support Ukraine? Do you think NATO has done enough to support the region and protect the region from Russia?
Such a provocative question. I think Europe has done maximum they could do. It's very difficult to take decision when you have 27 member states, but many countries, they provided more military support to Ukraine than they have military budget for themselves, which shows significant solidarity with Ukraine. Of course, much more can be done, especially in direction of sanctions. Of course, much more can be done by the United States, and we expect more decisive steps very soon. But Europe and the United States, but all the democratic countries, they must act together.
Franak Viačorka, Chief of Staff to the Belarus Opposition Leader, thank you so much for joining us and for your insights and analysis. Now, US President Donald Trump says he's not thrilled after Israel carried out an airstrike in Doha, targeting Hamas leaders and killing at least 6 people, including one Qatari security official. The attack has been condemned by Qatar and the UN, while Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it fully justified. Defense Minister Israel Katz has said Israel will target enemies wherever they are. Qatar is now looking into whether Netanyahu should be held responsible for the strikes. We can now go live to Washington to speak to our correspondent, Sarah Firth. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. So what are we learning from Washington about how much advance notice they had before Israel struck Hamas targets in Doha, almost a day after the event happened?
Yes, Leigh-Ann, the picture that's emerging here in Washington is one of a deeply strained line of communication and chain of command. You have US officials saying that they were informed very, very late in the day, in the hours before that strike. And importantly, it seems not through the usual political channels that they'd go through. In this case, it was Israel contacting the Pentagon. And what that meant, Leigh-Ann, is a lag in the information. So by the time President Trump got that information, we're being told, and then was able to direct his envoy, Steve Witkoff, to inform the Qataris the bombs were already falling. So that delay certainly raising questions here in Washington. We've seen both the president and the White House trying to distance themselves from that decision by Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel to carry out those strikes. President Trump putting out quite a lengthy Truth Social post in which he said that unilaterally bombing inside Qatar, a sovereign nation and close ally, was working very hard and bravely, he said, to broker peace in the Gaza conflict. It does not advance Israel or America's goals. So that's as far as he's gone in terms of a rebuke of Israel. But of course, it's not openly calling out Israel for those strikes.
And I think that is a really good point, because the White House has called the attack unfortunate. But as you just said to me, Sarah, stop short of condemning it. But the other question is, what does it reveal about America's balancing act now between Israel and key Gulf allies like Qatar?
Yes, it's a really delicate balancing act, Leigh-Ann. I mean, you've got the language here, right, that's being used by the White House. They've called it very unfortunate. You also had President Trump in a walkabout in D.C. last night saying he was very unhappy with what happened. But that's the kind of diplomatic equivalent, if you like, of a furrowed brow. It is expressing clear displeasure with what happened, but not outright disapproval here. It's a very difficult situation that President Trump and the US now finds itself in. You know, on the one hand, they've got Qatar that's been a very close ally. They have been at the forefront, a pivotal role that they're playing, really, in trying to push forward the agenda for Trump's peace plan for Gaza, to get the hostages released, this latest plan that is on the table. They were in talks to get that moved forward. You've also got, of course, Qatar, home to the largest US airbase in the region. It is a key strategic ally for America. And then on the other hand, you've got President Trump trying not to break ties with Israel. We've seen that President Trump has advised his Secretary of State to finalize a defense cooperation pact with Qatar. Now, the question's going to be really, Qatar coming out and calling this 100% treacherous. Will those words from President Trump, that lengthy post he put out on social media, will that and this promise of the cooperation defense pact be enough to smooth things over diplomatically? You know, that peace deal that the US has put forward that Qatar were helping to broker, that looks in jeopardy right now. We are expecting to hear from President Trump a little later on today, and of course he will be facing questions over this balancing act and what potentially America does next in response to this.
Yes, indeed. And just moving on to another story, looking forward slightly, President Trump is set to make an unprecedented second state visit to the UK. What do we know at this point about what might actually be on the agenda for that visit?
Yes, it's unusual. You don't usually have United States presidents getting a second state visit. He'd already had his first, of course, and he had a private trip to Scotland just a short while ago. But we'd seen when the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer was here, he hand-delivered that invitation from King Charles to Donald Trump. President Trump saying he was very, very honoured about it. He'll be meeting the monarch. It's the first time that he'll be meeting Charles since he did become monarch. So he'll be meeting the King and Queen in Windsor Castle. That's being used because there's refurbishments going on at Buckingham Palace. We don't have details of exactly what that three-day visit is going to look like yet, but it is clear that they're going to be talking about cooperation, transatlantic cooperation, and we know President Trump really likes to make use of this sort of political stage to show the strength of that relationship across the Atlantic. It's expected that on the trip you're going to have some pretty significant names in the world of tech. OpenAI's Sam Altman is expected to be on that trip, so possibly some tech deals will be being discussed as well. But with all the pomp and ceremony of that state visit, a second state visit for President Trump.
Yes, indeed. The special relationship, as they like to call it. Sarah Firth in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. I'm now joined by Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst, Riyad Kawaji. Riyad, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, Riyad, according to reports, several people have died in an Israeli strike on the Houthi armed forces media building in Yemen. That was happening today. What more do we know about what's happening?
Well, the information is now coming through. It seems that Israel has hit targets this time related to what is known as the Directorate of Moral Guidance. This is the department responsible for the media communications at the Houthi, and also targeted a couple of publications, newspapers, local newspapers, also believed to be owned by the Houthi. So again, Israel is going after high-profile targets as a means to elevate its deterrence, try to get the Houthi to cease their attacks, via drones, using drones or ballistic missiles that have been interrupting air traffic at major airports in Israel. So, based on what we have so far, is the Israelis are out of military options. They are out of military targets. So now they're going after infrastructure and high-profile targets as well related to the political establishment, which I believe, as well as other experts do, it has a little of any impact on the decision-making of the Houthi leadership with respect to the continued firing of these ballistic missiles and drones.
And Riyad, Israel brought their war with Hamas to the streets of Doha yesterday. Was the attack worth it for Israel, or was it a complete miscalculation?
Well, if you have to take it from the perspective of Prime Minister Netanyahu, they are in an existential war against Hamas, that they have vowed revenge and the elimination of all the leadership of the party, which they say were responsible for the October 7th attacks. So from their own perspective, it is worth it. But did it actually achieve the objectives? Was there actually an elimination of this leadership? So far, we don't know. But the Israeli media today seems to be more pessimistic that the intended targets were not eliminated, which is the Hamas leadership. But I believe the attack by itself has done a lot of political damage than any tactical gains.
And also, Qatar plays a pivotal role on the international stage, Riyad, hosting negotiations in a number of conflicts for decades. How will Israel's attack on Doha impact the ceasefire talks between Hamas and Israel?
Leigh-Ann, this is significant. For the first time ever, we see a country that is involved in trying to resolve a conflict between two parties, and two parties agreeing for the mediation provided by this host country gets attacked. And for the first time also, we see one country involved in a conflict with another and engaged in negotiations to resolve it, eliminates the negotiators from the other side. So this is absolutely flabbergasting. This is unprecedented. Definitely Qatar has already announced that they're pulling out from their mediation, is going to make any country now think twice, maybe more, before considering hosting talks between Israel and any other parties, whether it is Hamas or the Iranians or anybody else, because they would fear that Netanyahu would be, or the Israeli government would be carrying out such a strike, which is an attack on the sovereignty of the host country. So this is so wrong on so many levels when it comes to international norms and international law.
And as you did say, Riyadh, this is unprecedented. But what does it actually mean for one of the big successes of President Trump's first term? And that was, of course, Riyadh, the Abraham Accords. And we've spoken about that so many times. But following this attack, are the Abraham Accords under threat now? And will we see Donald Trump be able to extend those like he wanted to do in his second term? And what does this also mean for Arab-US relations, which Donald Trump, of course, was in Qatar and Saudi Arabia recently?
I will start from the last part of your question. The biggest victim of yesterday's attack was the U.S.-Arab relations. U.S. relations with its Arab allies was tremendously and seriously undermined by yesterday's attack. There was a U.S. airbase in Doha, which failed to do anything, which is now, if you look at the social media, everybody in the region, almost everybody, believes the U.S. was complicit in this, and the U.S. failed to provide the security it was supposed to do so by having this base in Qatar. So relations severely undermined. Going to the Abrahamic Accords, the anticipation was we will see more Arab Gulf countries joining the Abrahamic Accords. This is now all being fading away, undermined by Netanyahu's actions. First, by saying that they're going to be annexing the West Bank. By the way, one of the main reasons the Abu Dhabi signed the Abrahamic Accords was the Israelis agreeing not to build any more settlements and not to annex the West Bank. Now they're saying they want to annex back, and we heard the reaction from UAE that they will actually pull out from these accords. Now, attacking Doha, a neighboring Arab Gulf country, an ally, and a very active mediator, will definitely put big question marks on the possibility of reviving efforts to enlarge the Abrahamic Accords, bring in more signatories to it, at least not with this Israeli government. This Israeli government, Netanyahu's government, has failed at all levels. There is no credibility to it, and there will not be any peace with any country in the region with it staying in power, and the continuation of their policies where they have no regard to anybody and attacking and continuing this continued military campaigns and widening to reach other places is now threatening the peace treaties Israel has signed with its Arab neighbors.
Riyadh Kawaji, Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst and, of course, friend of the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Protesters in France have kicked off block everything demonstrations, blocking highways and causing major traffic jams. Dozens have already been arrested, and officials say more unrest could follow. The movement has been compared to the Yellow Vest protest as anger over President Emmanuel Macron's leadership continues to build. And staying in France, as President Macron has appointed his close ally, Sébastien Lecornu, just one day after François Bayrou was forced out in a failed confidence vote. At the age of just 39, Lecornu becomes Macron's seventh prime minister, tasked with tackling France's massive debt and pushing through a budget despite fierce opposition. For the first time, more children around the world are obese than underweight, according to UNICEF. 1 in 10 children between the ages of 5 and 19, approximately 188 million, are now living with obesity as diets do shift towards ultra-processed foods. UNICEF is urging governments to step in and protect children's health from the food industry's influence. And Australian scientists have developed a chlamydia vaccine for koalas, aiming to curb a disease that kills up to half of wild populations. The single-dose shot can protect koalas from infections that cause blindness, infertility and death. Researchers hope it will cut wild koala deaths by at least 65%. President Trump says he's ready to hit China and India with tariffs of up to 100% to pressure Russian President Vladimir Putin to negotiate with Ukraine, but only if EU states do follow suit. Trump made the demand during a meeting with senior US and EU officials working on ending the war. Patrick Falk reports.
Well, as we know, China and India are major buyers of Russian oil, and that's seen essentially as what's keeping the Russian economy afloat. The request Trump made, which was first reported in the Financial Times, follows remarks made by the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who said Washington is prepared to ramp up pressure on Moscow, but that it needed stronger European backing. It comes also after Trump's deadline for Putin to hold talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky passed without any indication the Russian leader was genuinely interested in any sort of peace talks. But the messaging was somewhat confused by social media posts made later on the same day saying that the US and India were continuing negotiations to try and address trade barriers, and Trump expressed optimism the two sides could resolve their dispute. Washington has already doubled tariffs on Indian exports to 50% over its purchases of Russian oil. So it makes you wonder whether there's some sort of broader strategy on how Trump deals with New Delhi, or whether he might have been backtracking on potentially damaging comments. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, for his part, wrote on social media that he was confident about unlocking the limitless potential of the India-US partnership. The tariff proposal also contrasts with a softer tone Trump has taken with China. As we know, he is keen to secure a summit, in particular with President Xi Jinping. Beijing would likely retaliate, though, against any escalation, and any measures on China risks destabilizing China's supply of magnets, crucial for American manufacturing.
Patrick Falk reporting there. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Oil prices have risen today following Israel's strike on Hamas leaders in Qatar. Brent crude futures rose 56 cents, while WTI crude gained 0.9%. Meanwhile, the US is pushing for new sanctions on Russian oil buyers, but worries about oversupply limited further gains. The manufacturers of weight loss drug Wegovy plan to cut 9,000 jobs in order to save $1.3 billion annually. Wegovy and Ozempic are losing market share as sales decline in the US. Novo Nordisk said around 5,000 of the cuts will take place in Denmark. Turning to the sports news now, and German car company Audi Formula One team has signed a sponsorship deal with Adidas for 2026. The apparel company will now supply 2 teams on the Formula One grid, adding to its existing deal with fellow German team Mercedes. And golf champion Rory McIlroy insists defending champions Europe will be the underdogs against US at Bethpage Black this month. Europe will the last team to win a Ryder Cup away from home with a victory in 2012. McIlroy will play in India for the first time in October and will return to the Australian Open in December. And Cristiano Ronaldo has become the joint highest ever goal scorer in a World Cup qualifying match after netting his 39th against Hungary. The 40-year-old extended his international record to 141 goals in his 223 appearances for Portugal, the most by any male player for the country. Ronaldo has scored 3 times in the 2026 World Cup qualifying campaign so far, with Portugal at the top of their group. A reminder of our top stories. Russia sends drones into Polish airspace as NATO and the West respond. Trump reacts to Israel's targeted strike in Doha after several Hamas members and a Qatari security officer was killed. And the US president encourages the EU to place 100% tariffs on China and India, forcing economic pressure on Russia. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. The Rail Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson will be coming up next. Plus, of course, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra, including a very special interview with the former US ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Goodbye and thank you.